The coffee shop fell silent as Captain Sarah "Ace" Morrison walked through the door, her worn leather flight jacket creaking with each step. At 62, she still carried herself with the precise bearing of someone who'd spent 4 decades commanding aircraft, but the whispers followed her like turbulence. Isn't that the old lady who thinks she can still fly? Someone should tell her the glory days are over. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking toward the counter. The young barista couldn't be more than 25, looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "What can I get you, ma'am?" The emphasis on ma'am felt like a slap. "Black coffee." "Large." Sarah's voice carried the same calm authority that had once guided passenger jets through Category 5 storms. Behind her, she heard the familiar voices of her former colleagues from Pinnacle Airlines. Jake Morrison, no relation, despite the shared name, was holding court with a group of younger pilots, his voice carrying just loud enough for her to hear. The FAA was right to ground her. 62 years old and still trying to prove she's got what it takes. Some people just don't know when to quit. Sarah's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. 3 months ago, she'd been forced into mandatory retirement despite a spotless 30-year record with Pinnacle. Not a single incident, not one passenger complaint. But the new company policy was ironclad. Pilots over 60 were liability risks. "Here's your coffee, Grandma." The barista smirked as he slid the cup across the counter. That was the final straw. Sarah turned, fixing the young man with the same steel-eyed stare that had made cocky co-pilots straighten up and fly right. "I've logged over 30,000 flight hours without a single accident," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "I've landed planes in conditions that would make grown men cry, and I've brought home every single passenger I've ever been responsible for. You serve coffee and make jokes about your betters. We are not the same." The coffee shop went dead silent. Even Jake's group stopped their chatter. The barista's face flushed red. "Listen, lady," Captain Morrison, Sarah corrected. "And you'd do well to remember that some of us earned our titles." She took her coffee and walked out, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence behind her. But as the door closed, she heard Jake's voice again. "See what I mean? Delusional old bird can't accept reality." Outside, Sarah leaned against her vintage Mustang and took a shaky breath. 3 months of this. 3 months of being treated like a relic, a has-been, a danger to herself and others. The worst part wasn't the insults, it was the growing doubt that maybe they were right. Her phone buzzed. Text message from her daughter Lisa. "Mom, please tell me you're not at that airport coffee shop again. You're torturing yourself." Sarah was typing a response when a different sound caught her attention. The distinctive whine of a helicopter's rotors. But something was wrong. The pitch was off, irregular. She looked up to see a Coast Guard rescue helicopter limping across the sky, black smoke trailing from its tail rotor. Her pilot instincts kicked in immediately. The aircraft was in serious trouble, fighting to maintain altitude as it headed toward the small regional airport adjacent to the coffee shop. Sarah jumped in her car and followed, her heart racing with a familiar mixture of adrenaline and focus. At the airport, she watched the helicopter make an emergency landing in the grass beside the main runway. Emergency vehicles were already racing toward it, sirens wailing. Sarah parked at the perimeter fence and ran toward the scene, her age forgotten in the rush of crisis. At the helicopter's crew chief, a young Coast Guard petty officer, was helping evacuate the aircraft when he spotted Sarah approaching the fence. "Ma'am, you need to stay back," he shouted over the noise of emergency vehicles. "I'm a pilot," Sarah called back. "What's your status?" "Tail rotor failure. We were coming back from a medical evacuation when we lost her." The chief looked barely out of his teens, but his eyes held the weight of responsibility. "We've got a critical patient aboard. A heart attack victim needs to get to regional medical within the hour, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sarah's mind was already working. Regional medical was 40 miles away through mountain terrain. An ambulance would take at least 90 minutes in good weather, and the storm clouds gathering on the horizon promised anything but good weather. "Do you have another aircraft available?" she asked. The chief shook his head grimly. "Our backup bird's down for maintenance. The nearest Coast Guard chopper is 3 hours out from Seattle by then." Sarah looked at the damaged helicopter, then at the small fixed-wing aircraft parked in the hangars beyond. Her eyes settled on a sleek twin-engine Beechcraft Baron, plane she knew like the back of her hand from her early days as a charter pilot. "Whose Baron is that?" she asked, pointing. "Belongs to Marcus Webb, local business owner. But it's not going anywhere. The storm front's moving in fast. Visibility's going to be near zero in these mountains within the hour." Sarah felt a familiar fire kindle in her chest. "I can fly in that weather." The chief gave her a skeptical look. "Ma'am, no offense, but Captain Sarah Morrison," she said, extending her hand. 30 years with Pinnacle Airlines, certified in mountain and weather operations. "I've flown through worse storms than this in an aircraft half as capable as that Baron." For a moment, the young man hesitated. Then another shout came from the helicopter. "Chief, patient's crashing. We need to move now." The chief looked from Sarah to the approaching storm clouds, then back to the helicopter where medics were working frantically over their patient. In that moment, regulations and procedures became secondary to the simple fact that someone was dying. "Can you really fly in this weather?" he asked. Sarah looked at the Baron, then at the darkening sky. Lightning flickered in the distance, and she could feel the barometric pressure dropping. It would be dangerous, possibly suicidal for a pilot with less experience. But she'd flown in conditions like this dozens of times, bringing passenger planes home safely when younger pilots would have diverted to alternate airports. "I can bring him home," she said with quiet confidence. "What do you think will happen next?" Share your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Within minutes, the small airport had transformed into a hub of controlled chaos. The Coast Guard medics had transferred their critical patient, a 67-year-old fisherman named Tom Bradley, to a gurney beside the Baron. His wife clutched his hand while EMTs worked to stabilize his vitals. Sarah was examining the aircraft when Marcus Webb, the plane's owner, came jogging up from the main terminal. A heavy-set man in his 50s, Webb owned 3 restaurants in the area and used the Baron for business trips to Seattle. "What the hell is going on here?" Webb demanded, his face red with exertion and indignation. "That's my plane." The Coast Guard chief, who'd introduced himself as Petty Officer First Class Danny Rodriguez, stepped forward. "Sir, we have a medical emergency. This woman says she can fly your aircraft to regional medical through the storm." Webb looked Sarah up and down dismissively. "Her? Are you insane? She's got to be 70 years old." 62, Sarah corrected calmly, continuing her pre-flight inspection. "And I have more hours in this type of aircraft than you have total flight time, Mr. Webb." "I don't care if you're Chuck Yeager's grandmother," Webb snapped. "You're not taking my plane into a thunderstorm. The insurance alone, Mr. Webb." The voice came from behind them. Sarah turned to see a woman in her 30s approaching, wearing the uniform of an FAA inspector. "I'm Inspector Janet Chun. I've been monitoring this situation from the tower." Webb's bluster deflated slightly. "Inspector, surely you can't approve this. Look at her." Inspector Chun looked at Sarah with professional assessment. "Captain Morrison, is it? I recognize the name. You had quite a reputation at Pinnacle." Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. Her forced retirement had been a bitter pill, and she wasn't sure if her reputation was good or bad in current FAA circles. "I've reviewed your service record," Chun continued. 30 years, no incidents, multiple commendations for weather operations. "Why were you grounded?" "Company policy," Sarah said simply. Mandatory retirement at 60. Chun nodded slowly, then turned to Webb. Mr. Webb, under emergency provisions of Part 91.3, a pilot in command may deviate from regulations when an in-flight emergency exists. I'm extending that authority to cover this ground emergency. But the storm, Webb protested. Captain Morrison is rated for instrument flight in adverse weather, Chun said. Her experience in mountain operations exceeds that of most active commercial pilots. If she says she can make this flight, I'm inclined to believe her. From the gurney, Tom Bradley's wife spoke up, her voice breaking. Please, he's all I have left. Our children. They're flying in from Denver, but they won't make it in time if... Sarah met the woman's eyes and saw her own fears reflected there. The fear of being too late, too old, too forgotten to matter when it counted most. Mrs. Bradley, Sarah said gently, I'm going to bring your husband home safely. You have my word. A rumble of thunder rolled across the airport. The storm was moving faster than predicted. Sarah could see the wall of rain approaching from the northwest. They had maybe 20 minutes before conditions became impossible. Chief Rodriguez, Sarah said, turning to the young Coast Guard officer, can your medics work in the aircraft during flight? If it's not too rough, Rodriguez replied. Petty Officer Kim is a qualified flight medic. Sarah nodded and turned to Inspector Chun. I'll need a weather briefing and current UNOTMS for the route. Already pulling them up, Chun said, checking her tablet. Visibility is dropping to minimums along your route. Ceiling is forecast at 200 feet with embedded thunderstorms. Mountain obscuration is likely. It was everything Sarah had expected and worse. But she'd flown through similar conditions many times, threading passenger jets between mountain peaks, when younger pilots would have turned back. File an IFR flight plan, Sarah said. Direct route to regional medical, request priority handling. Captain, Rodriguez said hesitantly, are you sure about this? I mean no disrespect, but... Sarah looked at the young man who was probably the same age as her son, and she saw the same doubt everyone else had been showing her for months. The same assumption that age meant incompetence, that experience was less valuable than youth. Chief, she said quietly, how old are you? 26, ma'am. When I was 26, I thought experience was just something old people talked about to make themselves feel important. Then I flew through my first real emergency engine failure at night over the Pacific with 200 souls on board. You know what saved everyone? Rodriguez shook his head. Not reflexes, not perfect vision, not physical strength. Sarah tapped her temple. Knowledge, experience, the ability to stay calm when everything goes to hell because you've been through hell before and lived to tell about it. Another rumble of thunder, closer this time. Sarah could smell rain on the wind. I've got 30,000 hours of experience telling me I can make this flight, she continued. How many hours of experience are telling you I can't? Rodriguez looked uncomfortable but had no answer. That's what I thought. Sarah turned to the medics. Load him up. We launch in 5 minutes. As the medical team moved Tom Bradley into the Baron's cabin, Sarah completed her pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of 3 decades in the cockpit. Every switch, every gauge, every control surface. She examined it all despite having inspected the aircraft moments earlier. Webb watched from a distance, muttering complaints to anyone who would listen, but Inspector Chen had made it clear the flight was approved. The Baron was airworthy, the pilot was qualified, and the emergency was real. Sarah was checking the fuel quantity when a familiar voice called out behind her. Well, look what we have here. She turned to see Jake Morrison approaching with 2 other Pinnacle pilots. They must have come from the coffee shop to see what all the commotion was about. Ace Morrison, trying to relive her glory days, Jake continued with a smirk. This is rich. When they pull your body out of the wreckage, I hope they remember that people tried to stop you. Sarah felt the familiar burn of humiliation, But this time it was different. This time, someone's life hung in the balance, and she had the skills to save him. Age wasn't a liability, it was an asset. "Jake," she said calmly, "in 30 years of flying, I've never left a passenger behind. Today won't be the first time." 30 years of flying easy routes in good weather, Jake shot back. "This isn't some milk run to Phoenix, old woman. This is real flying, and you're too old for real flying." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then turned to Rodriguez. "Chief, are we ready?" "Yes, ma'am. The patient's loaded and stable." Sarah climbed into the pilot's seat and began her engine start sequence. Through the cockpit window, she could see Jake and his friends watching with expressions of smug superiority, waiting for her to back down, to admit she was too old, too scared, too washed up to handle a real emergency. Instead, she keyed the radio. "Regional Tower, Baron 47 Delta requesting immediate departure. IFR to Regional Medical, emergency medical flight. Baron 47 Delta, cleared for takeoff runway 09. Contact departure on 124.7. Good luck." Sarah advanced the throttles and felt the familiar surge of power as the Baron rolled forward. Behind her, she could hear the steady beep of Tom Bradley's heart monitor and the quiet professionalism of the flight medic working to keep him alive. As the aircraft lifted off into the darkening sky, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the pure joy of flying, of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was born to do. The storm was waiting for them in the mountains ahead. But Sarah Morrison had been flying through storms for 30 years. This was just another day at the office. At 2,000 feet, the Baron climbed through a layer of scattered clouds that grew thicker and more ominous with each passing mile. Sarah's hands moved across the instrument panel with practiced efficiency, setting up the aircraft for instrument flight conditions. Behind her, Flight Medic Petty Officer Kim worked quietly over Tom Bradley, whose condition had stabilized but remained critical. "Regional approach, Baron 47 Delta with you at 2,500. Requesting vector to Regional Medical," Sarah radioed. "Baron 47 Delta, radar contact. Be advised we're showing intense precipitation along your route with embedded thunderstorms. Current visibility at Regional is 1 mile in heavy rain, ceiling 300 feet. Are you equipped for the Cat 2 approach?" Sarah glanced at the instrument panel. The Baron was well equipped, but not certified for the most demanding instrument approaches. Negative on Cat 2, but unqualified for standard ILS to minimums. Copy that. Vector heading 120, descend and maintain 4,000. Advise when you have the field in sight. As the Baron descended into the clouds, the first turbulence hit. Nothing severe, just the gentle bumping that preceded real weather. In the cabin, Sarah heard the medic adjusting his position to maintain balance while working on his patient. "How's he doing back there?" Sarah called. "Vitals are holding steady," Kim replied. "But we need to get him to a cath lab soon. His EKG is showing some concerning changes." Sarah looked ahead at the wall of weather they were approaching. Lightning flickered within the dark mass of clouds, and she could see sheets of rain already obscuring the mountains ahead. This was going to be challenging, even by her standards. Her radio crackled to life. "Baron 47 Delta, be advised we're getting reports of severe turbulence and wind shear in your area. Several aircraft have diverted. Do you want to request an alternate airport?" For a moment, Sarah considered it. Prudence dictated turning back, finding an alternate route, waiting for better weather. But Tom Bradley didn't have time for prudence. His wife's face flashed in Sarah's mind, along with all the doubting voices that had been telling her she was too old, too washed up, too dangerous to fly. "Regional approach, 47 Delta is continuing the approach. Request direct to Regional when possible." "Roger, 47 Delta. Turn right heading 140, descend to 3,000. You're cleared directly to regional when able. The Baron entered the storm system like a small boat hitting ocean swells. The first real jolt of turbulence threw Sarah against her shoulder. Harness and sent unsecured items flying around the cabin. Behind her, she heard Kim grunt with effort as he braced himself against the aircraft's violent motion. "Sorry about that," Sarah called back. "It's going to get rougher." She wasn't exaggerating. As they penetrated deeper into the storm, the turbulence intensified. The Baron bucked and rolled like an angry bronco, fighting Sarah's control inputs. Rain hammered against the windscreen with such intensity that she could barely see the instrument panel, let alone anything outside. Lightning exploded. Around them, brilliant, blinding flashes that turned the cockpit into a strobing nightmare. Thunder crashed so close that Sarah felt it in her bones, and she could smell the ozone of electrical activity in the air. This was the kind of weather that killed pilots. The kind of conditions that turned experienced aviators into cautionary tailies. Sarah had flown through storms before, but never anything quite this violent, this malevolent. The Baron's engines sputtered momentarily as they hit a wall of water, causing Sarah's heart to skip a beat. Engine failure in these conditions would be a death sentence. But the power plants recovered, their steady roar providing a comforting counterpoint to the chaos outside. Baron 47 Delta, regional approach. We're showing you heavy precipitation. What are you seeing? Sarah keyed the microphone while fighting to keep the aircraft level. 47 Delta is in severe weather, moderate to severe turbulence, but maintaining heading and altitude. What she didn't mention was that she was flying entirely on instruments now. The outside world had disappeared completely in a gray-black wall of water and wind. Only the glowing dials and screens in front of her provided any reference to up, down, or forward progress. "The patient's stable, but we're getting bounced around pretty good back here," Kim reported. "How much longer?" Sarah checked her navigation display. They were still 20 miles from regional medical, fighting headwinds that were cutting their ground speed in half. At this rate, it would take another 15 minutes to reach their destination, if they made it at all. A massive downdraft grabbed the Baron and slammed it downward like a giant fist. Sarah fought the controls as the aircraft dropped 500 feet in seconds, her stomach floating as they fell through the turbulent air. The stall warning horn began to sound as the wings lost lift in the chaotic airflow. This was it, the moment when experience separated the professionals from the amateurs. Sarah had felt this sensation before, in smaller doses, during her thousands of hours in airline cockpits. She knew that panic was the enemy, that smooth, deliberate control inputs were the only way to survive. She eased the throttles forward, adding power while gently raising the nose to recover from the dive. The Baron's engines responded with a surge of thrust, and slowly, carefully, the aircraft climbed back to its assigned altitude. "Nice recovery," Kim called from the back. "For a minute there I thought we were going to become part of the landscape." Sarah allowed herself a tight smile. Maybe she wasn't too old after all, but the storm wasn't finished with them. As they approached the final approach course to regional medical, a new threat emerged: icing. The outside air temperature had dropped below freezing, and Sarah could see ice beginning to form on the leading edges of the wings. Ice was a killer. It changed the wing's shape, reducing lift and increasing drag. Enough ice could make an aircraft unflyable, sending it tumbling from the sky like a frozen brick. Sarah activated the Baron's de-icing system, watching as heated air flowed over the wing surfaces to prevent ice accumulation. But the system was designed for light icing conditions, not the severe buildup they were encountering. Regional approach. Baron 47 Delta requesting immediate vector to final approach. "We're picking up ice and need to get down." 47 Delta turn. Left heading 090. Descend to 2,500. You're 8 miles from the outer marker. Contact tower on 119.1. Sarah made the frequency change and checked her approach plate one more time. The ILS approach to regional medical would take them down through the clouds to a decision height of 200 feet above the ground. If they couldn't see the runway at that point, they'd have to execute a missed approach and try again, time that Tom Bradley might not have. Regional Tower, Baron 47 Delta on final approach, emergency medical flight. Baron 47 Delta, Regional Tower, you're cleared to land runway 18. Wind 200 at 25 gusting 40. Visibility 1 mile in heavy rain. Emergency equipment is standing by. Sarah felt the Baron being pushed around by the crosswind as they descended through the clouds. Ice continued to accumulate on the wings despite the de-icing system, and she could feel the aircraft becoming sluggish and heavy in her hands. At 500 feet, they were still in solid clouds. At 400 feet, nothing but gray soup outside the windscreen. At 300 feet, Sarah began to wonder if this approach was going to work. Then, at 250 feet, she saw lights through the rain, the approach lights leading to runway 18. A moment later, the runway itself came into view, a black ribbon of asphalt glistening with water, but solid and real beneath the storm. Sarah fought the crosswind and ice-laden controls, making constant adjustments to keep the Baron aligned with the runway centerline. The aircraft wanted to weather vane into the wind, and the ice made it respond slowly to her control inputs. 50 feet above the runway, a massive gust of wind tried to push them sideways. Sarah applied opposite rudder and aileron, using every ounce of her experience to keep the aircraft under control. 20 feet. 10 feet. The Baron's main landing gear touched down on the wet runway with a satisfying thump, and Sarah immediately applied reverse thrust and brakes to stop the aircraft in the challenging conditions. They had made it. As the Baron rolled to a stop near the medical center, Sarah saw the ambulance and medical team already waiting. The storm still raged around them, but they were on the ground safe, with Tom Bradley still alive in the cabin behind her. "Outstanding flying, Captain," Kim said as he prepared to transfer his patient. "I've flown with a lot of pilots over the years, and that was some of the best airmanship I've ever seen." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the aircraft's heater. For the first time in months, someone had called her Captain with genuine respect rather than condescension, but their work wasn't finished yet. Tom Bradley still needed to reach the cardiac catheterization lab, still needed the medical intervention that would save his life. The tension is building. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments which character you're rooting for. Your support helps me create more incredible stories like this one. The medical team moved with practiced efficiency, transferring Tom Bradley from the Baron to the waiting ambulance while rain continued to pound the tarmac. Sarah watched from the cockpit as EMTs connected fresh IV lines and monitoring equipment, her heart still racing from the harrowing flight through the storm. Dr. Michelle Santos, Regional Medical's Chief of Cardiology, appeared at Sarah's cockpit window, rain streaming from her scrubs as she leaned in. "Are you the pilot who brought him through this storm?" she asked, having to shout over the wind and rain. Sarah nodded. "How is he?" "Alive, thanks to you. But we need to get him to the cath lab immediately. His troponin levels indicate massive cardiac damage, and we've got a narrow window to save the muscle tissue." Through the rain-streaked windscreen, Sarah watched the ambulance race toward the medical center's emergency entrance, its red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement like liquid fire. She had done her part. Tom Bradley was at the hospital. Now it was up to the doctors. Sarah began shutting down the Baron's systems when her radio crackled to life. "Baron 47 Delta, this is the regional tower. We've got another aircraft inbound declaring an emergency. Private jet with mechanical problems, requesting immediate approach." Sarah looked up to see approach lights cutting through the storm as another aircraft descended toward the runway. A sleek corporate jet materialized from the clouds, but something was clearly wrong. The aircraft was yawing back and forth, fighting to maintain control. Regional Tower, Gulfstream 892 Alpha, declaring emergency. We've lost our primary flight controls. Hydraulic failure. We're flying on backup systems only. Sarah's blood ran cold. A hydraulic failure in weather like this was a death sentence for most pilots. The backup systems on corporate jets were adequate for normal conditions, but in severe turbulence and crosswinds, they were barely enough to maintain basic control. She watched the Gulfstream's approach, immediately recognizing the signs of an aircraft in serious trouble. The jet was oscillating from side to side, overcorrecting for wind gusts because the pilot couldn't make the fine control adjustments possible with full hydraulic authority. 892 Alpha, Regional Tower. Wind is now 210 at 30, gusting 45. Visibility is 3/4 of a mile. Emergency equipment is rolling. Sarah could see the Gulfstream pilot struggling with the crosswind, the aircraft drifting left and right of the runway centerline as he fought the degraded controls. At 200 feet above the ground, a massive wind shear hit the jet, pushing it well to the left of the runway. The pilot attempted to correct, but the backup flight controls responded too slowly. The Gulfstream's right wing dipped dangerously low. As it swung back toward the runway, overcorrecting for the wind shear, Sarah keyed her radio without thinking. 892 Alpha, Baron 47 Delta on the ground. You're overcorrecting for the wind. Use smaller inputs and lead the corrections. Who is this? Came the stressed voice from the Gulfstream. Captain Sarah Morrison, 30 years airline experience. You need to anticipate the wind gusts instead of reacting to them. Watch the windsock at the approach end. It'll tell you what's coming. I can't see the windsock through this rain. Sarah looked out her side window and could just make out the airport windsock through the storm. It was whipping back and forth violently, indicating wind shear and dangerous gusts. 892 Alpha, gust coming from the right in 3 seconds. Now. The Gulfstream pilot was ready this time, making a small correction just as the wind hit. The aircraft stayed on the center line instead of being blown off course. How did you know? The pilot asked, his voice still tight with stress. Experience. Sarah replied, left crosswind gust in 5 seconds. Mark. Again, the pilot was ready, making the correction before the wind shear could push him off the approach path. Sarah continued to call out the wind patterns, reading the storm like a book written in rain and turbulence. You're looking good now, 892 Alpha, 50 feet, right on centerline. A small correction left. Now you're perfect. Flare in 3.2.1. The Gulfstream touched down firmly but safely on the rain-soaked runway, its tires sending up huge sprays of water as the pilot applied maximum braking. Baron 47 Delta, this is 892 Alpha. I don't know who you are, but you just saved 6 lives. Thank you. Sarah felt that familiar warmth again, the satisfaction of using her skills to help others. But before she could respond, another voice came over the radio, one she recognized immediately. This is Jake Morrison in the regional terminal. That was just dumb luck, not skill. Any competent pilot could have talked him down. Sarah's jaw tightened. Even after she'd just helped save lives, Jake couldn't let it go. Couldn't admit that maybe, just maybe, her experience was worth something. Actually, came a new voice over the radio. This is Captain Rodriguez with the 892 Alpha. I'm a 15-year veteran pilot with over 8,000 hours, and I've never experienced coaching like that. Whoever you are, Baron 47 Delta, you probably saved my aircraft and passengers. That was exceptional airmanship. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Just doing what any pilot would do, she radioed back. No, Rodriguez replied. That was something special. May I ask about your background? Captain Sarah Morrison, retired from Pinnacle Airlines. 30 years and 30,000 hours, mostly mountain and weather operations. There was a long pause before Rodriguez responded, "Captain Morrison. You're Sarah Morrison? The pilot who landed that 737 in Denver with complete hydraulic failure 5 years ago?" Sarah remembered that flight engine failure had damaged all 3 hydraulic systems, leaving her with only manual reversion controls. She'd managed to land the aircraft safely using differential thrust and pure flying skill, saving all 147 souls on board. "That was me," she said quietly. "Ma'am, that's required reading at our company now. Your emergency procedures are part of our training syllabus. It's an honor to meet you, even under these circumstances." Before Sarah could respond, Jake's voice cut back in, filled with venom. "Ancient history doesn't mean much when you're too old and slow to handle current operations. She got lucky tonight, nothing more." But Jake was quickly overwhelmed by other voices, controllers, pilots, even ground personnel who had been listening to the exchanges. All of them praised Sarah's performance, thanking her for the assistance, expressing amazement at her skill in coaching the Gulfstream pilot through the dangerous approach. Sarah climbed out of the Baron and was immediately soaked by the driving rain, but she didn't care. She walked toward the terminal, her wet flight jacket clinging to her shoulders, feeling more alive than she had in months. Inside the terminal, she found Tom Bradley's wife sitting in the waiting area, her hands clasped in prayer. The woman looked up as Sarah approached, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Mrs. Bradley? I'm Captain Morrison, the pilot who flew your husband here." The older woman stood and immediately embraced Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Thank you so much, the doctors say. They say if we'd waited for an ambulance, he wouldn't have made it." Sarah felt her own eyes growing moist. "How is he now?" "In surgery. Dr. Santos says the next few hours are critical, but they were able to open the blocked artery. He has a chance now, thanks to you." From across the terminal, Sarah noticed a small crowd gathering: airport personnel, the crew from the Gulfstream, even some passengers who had been stranded by the storm. They were all looking in her direction, many of them pointing and whispering. Inspector Chun approached from the group, a slight smile on her face. "Captain Morrison, I've been fielding calls for the last hour. 3 different news stations want to interview you about the rescue flight, and the FAA regional administrator wants to speak with you personally." Sarah felt a moment of panic. "Am I in trouble?" Chun laughed. "Quite the opposite. That was some of the finest emergency airmanship anyone's seen in years. You've just reminded a lot of people that experience and skill don't have expiration dates." As if summoned by the mention of news stations, a reporter and cameraman pushed through the terminal doors, their equipment protected by plastic covers against the rain. "Captain Morrison?" the reporter called out. "I'm Jenny Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you about tonight's rescue flight." Sarah hesitated. She'd spent months avoiding attention, trying to fade quietly into retirement. But looking around at the faces watching her, respect, admiration, genuine appreciation, she realized that maybe it was time to stop hiding. "What would you like to know?" she asked. The cameraman set up his equipment while the reporter prepared her notes. "Captain Morrison, you're 62 years old and were recently forced into retirement. Tonight, you flew through one of the worst storms in recent memory to save a man's life, then talked another pilot through a dangerous emergency landing. How does it feel to prove that age is just a number?" Sarah considered the question carefully. For months, she'd been listening to people tell her she was too old, too slow, too dangerous to fly. Tonight, she'd proven otherwise, not just to them, but to herself. "Flying isn't about how old you are," she said finally. "It's about knowledge, experience, and the courage to use both when lives are on the line. I've spent 30 years learning how to handle emergencies like tonight. That experience doesn't disappear just because someone decides I've reached an arbitrary age limit." "What would you say to other older pilots who've been forced into retirement?" Sarah thought about all the experienced aviators she knew who'd been pushed aside, their skills and knowledge wasted because some administrator decided they were too old to contribute. I'd say don't let anyone convince you that your experience doesn't matter. When the weather gets bad and the situation gets desperate, it's not youth that saves lives, it's skill, knowledge, and the wisdom that only comes with time. The interview was interrupted by Dr. Santos emerging from the surgical wing, still in her scrubs. She walked directly to Mrs. Bradley, and Sarah could see from her expression that the news was good. The procedure was successful, Dr. Santos announced. To the small crowd, we were able to clear the blockage and restore blood flow to the heart muscle. Mr. Bradley is stable and should make a full recovery. Mrs. Bradley collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed with relief. Around the terminal, applause broke out spontaneously from passengers, airport workers, medical staff, even the news crew. But the loudest applause came from an unexpected source. Captain Rodriguez from the Gulfstream was clapping enthusiastically, along with his passengers and crew. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the terminal, "I want you all to know that Captain Sarah Morrison didn't just save one life tonight, she saved 7. Without her guidance, my aircraft and passengers would not have made it down safely." The next morning, Sarah woke to find her phone buzzing with missed calls and notifications. The story of the emergency rescue flight had gone viral overnight, shared across social media platforms with headlines like, "Retired pilot saves lives after being called too old to fly," and 62-year-old captain proves age is just a number. She scrolled through the messages, finding interview requests from major news networks, job offers from charter companies, and hundreds of messages from pilots around the world sharing their own stories of age discrimination. But the call that surprised her most came from an unlisted number at 7 a.m. "Captain Morrison? This is Admiral Patricia Hayes, Commandant of the Coast Guard. I hope I'm not calling too early." Sarah sat up straighter in bed. "Not at all, Admiral. How can I help you?" "I'm calling to thank you personally for your assistance yesterday. Chief Rodriguez has filed a complete report on the medical evacuation, and I wanted you to know that your actions saved not just Mr. Bradley's life, but potentially the lives of Captain Rodriguez and his passengers as well." "I was just doing what any pilot would do, ma'am." "No, Captain Morrison, you were doing what a skilled, experienced pilot would do, which brings me to why I'm really calling." Admiral Hayes paused. "The Coast Guard has been struggling with a shortage of experienced pilots, particularly for our search and rescue operations in challenging weather conditions. We've been forced to rely on younger aviators who, while competent, lack the kind of experience that made the difference yesterday." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" "I'm suggesting that the Coast Guard could use consultants like you, experienced pilots who can train our younger crews, assist with particularly challenging missions, and provide the kind of real-world expertise that can't be taught in a classroom." Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Hayes continued, "We've been watching the debate over mandatory retirement ages in aviation, and frankly, we think the industry is making a mistake. Experience like yours is invaluable, and we'd like to put it to good use." Sarah's mind raced. A chance to fly again, to use her skills in service of others, to prove that her experience still had value. What would this position involve? "Initially, we'd want you to help develop an advanced weather flying curriculum for our pilots. Eventually, you might participate in actual rescue operations when conditions are beyond the capability of our standard crews. The pay would be commensurate with your experience, and you'd have the satisfaction of knowing you're saving lives." It was everything Sarah had hoped for but been afraid to dream about. "Admiral, I'm very interested." "Excellent. I'll have my staff contact you with the details." "And Captain Morrison? Thank you for reminding us that wisdom and experience are force multipliers in aviation." After hanging up, Sarah made coffee and sat on her porch, watching the morning sun. burn off the remnants of the previous night's storm. The mountains in the distance were crystal clear, and she could see aircraft taking off from the regional airport, their navigation lights twinkling as they climbed into the perfect blue sky. Her peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into her driveway. She looked up to see Inspector Chun getting out of an official FAA vehicle, carrying a briefcase and wearing a serious expression. "Inspector Chun," Sarah said, rising to greet her. "I hope there's no problem with yesterday's flight." "Quite the opposite," Chun replied, accepting Sarah's offer of coffee. "I'm here on behalf of the FAA administrator. Your actions yesterday have sparked some serious discussions at the highest levels of the agency." They sat on the porch, and Chun opened her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "Captain Morrison, are you familiar with the current pilot shortage facing the aviation industry?" "I've read about it. Airlines are struggling to find qualified pilots, especially with experience in complex operations." "That's correct. And it's not just airlines, charter operations, corporate aviation, even government agencies are all competing for the same limited pool of experienced aviators." Chun opened the folder, revealing charts and statistics. The mandatory retirement age of 65 for airline pilots was established when life expectancy and health standards were very different. Many countries have already raised their limits, and the data shows no correlation between age and accident rates for pilots with current medical certificates. Sarah sipped her coffee, wondering where this was leading. Yesterday's events have accelerated some discussions that were already taking place, Chun continued. The FAA is considering a pilot program, no pun intended, that would allow experienced pilots, like yourself, to continue flying in certain capacities beyond traditional retirement ages. What kind of capacities? Emergency operations, training. Roles, specialty missions requiring advanced weather or mountain flying experience. Essentially, positions where experience and judgment are more important than the physical demands of regular airline schedules. Sarah felt a surge of excitement but tried to remain calm. What would be required? Enhanced medical examinations, recurrent training, and demonstrated proficiency in current aircraft systems. But for pilots with your background and recent performance record, it would be a pathway back to active flying status. Before Sarah could respond, another car turned into her driveway. This one she recognized Marcus Webb's BMW, and he did not look happy. Webb stormed up to the porch, his face red with anger. "What the hell did you do to my airplane?" Sarah stood, her expression cooling. "I flew it safely to regional medical and back, Mr. Webb. Your aircraft is undamaged and ready for service." "Ready for service?" "The damn thing is covered in ice damage. The engine's ingested who knows how much water. And the insurance company is asking questions about unauthorized use." Inspector Chun cleared her throat. "Mr. Webb, under emergency authority provisions, Captain Morrison's use of your aircraft was fully authorized. As for any damage, I inspected the Baron this morning and found no issues beyond normal wear." Webb turned his anger toward Chun. Normal wear? She flew it through a thunderstorm. No responsible pilot would have attempted that flight. "Actually," Chun replied calmly, "Captain Morrison's flight is being studied as a textbook example of superior weather flying technique. Her decision-making and execution were flawless." "Flawless?" Webb's voice rose. "She's a washed-up old woman who got lucky. If she was so good, why did Pinnacle Airlines force her to retire?" Sarah felt the familiar sting of that accusation, but before she could respond, Inspector Chun stepped forward. "Mr. Webb, Captain Morrison was forced to retire due to company policy, not performance issues. Her service record shows 0 accidents, 0 incidents, and multiple commendations for exceptional airmanship. Companies like Pinnacle are finding that their age-based retirement policies are costing them their most experienced and capable pilots." Webb opened his mouth to argue, but Chun continued. Furthermore, the publicity from yesterday's rescue has already generated significant positive attention for regional airport and the surrounding community. 3 major aviation companies have called this morning asking about basing operations here, specifically because of the caliber of pilots apparently available in the area. Sarah looked at Chen with surprise. Really? Really? Your demonstration of advanced weather flying skills in challenging conditions has reminded the aviation industry that experience matters. Several companies are now reconsidering their age-based retirement policies. Webb looked between the 2 women, his anger deflating into frustration. I still don't like strangers taking my airplane without permission. Mr. Webb, Sarah said quietly, I understand your concerns. But if it had been your family member having a heart attack, would you have wanted that flight to happen? Webb's expression softened slightly. That's different. No, it's not. Tom Bradley is someone's husband, someone's father. He has grandchildren who almost lost their grandfather yesterday. I would have flown that mission if it was my own aircraft at risk. Before Webb could respond, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her daughter Lisa's number. Mom, I just saw the news. Lisa's voice was excited and proud. You're all over the internet. My friends are calling me asking if the hero pilot is really my mother. Sarah smiled. It's not that big a deal, honey. Not a big deal? Mom, you saved lives. And you proved all those jerks wrong who said you were too old to fly. Lisa paused. I'm so proud of you. Dad would have been proud too. The mention of her late husband brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He had been her biggest supporter during her flying career, always encouraging her to pursue her dreams, even when others doubted her abilities. Thanks, sweetheart. That means everything to me. After hanging up, Sarah found both Chun and Webb looking at her with different expressions, Chun with respect and approval, Webb with something that might have been grudging admiration. Captain Morrison, Chun said, I need to get back to the office, but I'll be in touch about the pilot program. The administrator is very interested in moving forward quickly. After Chun left, Webb lingered on the porch, seeming unsure what to say. Mr. Webb, Sarah said finally, I'm sorry about using your aircraft without explicit permission. In the heat of the moment, saving a life took precedence over protocol. Webb studied her for a long moment. You really think you could have made that flight in any aircraft? Weather flying isn't about the airplane, Mr. Webb. It's about the pilot's ability to read conditions, make decisions, and execute techniques that come from experience. Your Baron is a fine aircraft, but it was just a tool. The real work was done up here. She tapped her temple. Webb nodded slowly. I've been flying for 15 years, and I wouldn't have attempted that flight in perfect weather, let alone in a storm. Different pilots have different comfort levels, Sarah said diplomatically. No, Webb said firmly. I watched that approach from the terminal. What you did was exceptional. I couldn't have done it, and I'm 30 years younger than you. He paused, then extended his hand. Captain Morrison, I owe you an apology. And I owe you thanks. If you ever need an aircraft for another emergency, you have my permission to use the Baron. Sarah shook his hand, surprised by the genuine respect in his voice. Thank you, Mr. Webb. That means a lot. After Webb left, Sarah sat back down on her porch and looked out at the clear sky. For the first time in months, the future looked bright. She had job offers, respect from her peers, and most importantly, the knowledge that her skills and experience still had value. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Captain Morrison, this is Jake Morrison. We need to talk. Meet me at the airport coffee shop at 2 p.m. Sarah stared at the message, wondering what Jake could possibly want to discuss. After months of belittling her abilities and questioning her competence, what could he have to say now? There was only one way to find out. The coffee shop was unusually busy for a weekday afternoon, filled with aviation enthusiasts, reporters, and curious locals who had heard about the previous night's dramatic rescue. Sarah noticed several people pointing at her as she entered, but their expressions were admiring rather than dismissive, a stark contrast to the mockery she'd faced just 24 hours earlier. Jake Morrison sat at a corner table, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something Sarah had never seen before: uncertainty. He looked up as she approached, and she was surprised to see dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept. "Jake," she said, taking the seat across from him, "you wanted to talk." Jake stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before speaking. "I saw the news coverage this morning. All of it. The rescue flight, the approach assistance, the interviews." He looked up at her. "I've been flying for 12 years, Sarah. I thought I knew what good flying looked like." Sarah waited, sensing that Jake was struggling with something deeper than professional jealousy. "What you did last night, .. Jake shook his head. "I couldn't have done it. Hell, I wouldn't have even attempted it. When I saw that storm system on the radar, I grounded myself and went home." "That was a prudent decision," Sarah said carefully. "Different pilots have different risk tolerances." "Don't." Jake's voice was sharp. "Don't make excuses for me. I've spent months telling everyone. Who would listen that you were too old, too slow, too dangerous to fly? Last night, you proved that I'm the one who's not qualified for the tough missions." Sarah studied Jake's face, seeing genuine torment in his eyes. "Jake, what's really going on here?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, I was flying a charter flight from Phoenix to Denver. Business executive, routine trip, good weather. Everything was perfect until we started our descent." He paused, his hands trembling slightly around his coffee cup. "We hit unexpected turbulence, nothing severe, just moderate bumps. But the passenger got airsick, really airsick, and started having what looked like a medical emergency. Chest pains, difficulty breathing, the works." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. She'd heard this story before, or one very similar to it. "I should have declared an emergency, should have requested priority handling to get him to a hospital quickly. But I was worried about the paperwork, the questions, the potential liability. So I continued to Denver as planned, thinking it was just motion sickness." Jake's voice broke slightly. "He died in the back of the plane, Sarah. Massive heart attack 20 minutes from landing. The doctor said if I'd gotten him to a hospital even 30 minutes earlier, he would have survived." Sarah reached across the table and touched Jake's hand. "Jake, I'm sorry, I had no idea. That's why I've been so angry at you," Jake continued. "Watching you make split-second decisions, take calculated risks, do whatever it takes to save lives. You represent everything I should have been and wasn't when it mattered most." The pieces began to fall into place for Sarah. Jake's hostility hadn't been about her age or competence. It had been about his own guilt and inadequacy. "I've spent 3 years telling myself that playing it safe was the right choice," Jake said. "That taking risks was reckless, that experienced pilots were just adrenaline junkies who couldn't accept their limitations. It was easier than admitting that I failed when someone needed me most." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "Jake, you made a decision based on the information you had at the time. That doesn't make you a bad pilot, doesn't it?" Jake looked at her with haunted eyes. "You flew through conditions that would have killed most pilots because someone needed help. I played it safe and let someone die. Different situations, different circumstances," Sarah said firmly. "You can't compare them directly, can't I? We're both pilots, Sarah. We both took an oath to serve and protect when we put on these wings. I failed that oath, and you've spent your career honoring it." Sarah looked around the coffee shop, noticing that their conversation had drawn some attention from nearby tables. She lowered her voice. "Jake, what happened to your passenger was tragic, but it doesn't define you as a pilot. You've flown safely for 12 years. You've brought hundreds of passengers home to their families. That counts for something, does it? Because when the chips were down, when someone's life was literally in my hands, I chose procedure over compassion, regulations over responsibility. Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about her own career, her own close calls and difficult decisions. Jake, can I tell you something? In 30 years of flying, I've made mistakes. I've had flights where I could have done better, decisions I regret, moments where luck was more important than skill. Jake looked at her skeptically. You, Miss Perfect Record? The Denver hydraulic failure that Captain Rodriguez mentioned yesterday? I almost didn't declare an emergency. I spent precious minutes trying to troubleshoot the problem myself, thinking I could handle it without involving a TC. If I'd been a little more stubborn, a little more concerned about my reputation, that flight could have ended very differently. Jake's expression shifted slightly. But you did declare the emergency. Eventually. And do you know what made the difference? Experience. Not just technical knowledge, but the emotional experience of knowing that sometimes you have to swallow your pride and ask for help. Sarah leaned forward. Jake, the difference between you and me isn't talent or courage. It's simply time. I've had 30 years to learn from my mistakes, to develop the judgment that comes from facing difficult situations. You've had 12 years, and you're still learning. But that passenger was one person, Jake. How many people have you transported safely since then? How many families have you reunited? How many business deals have you facilitated? How many lives have you touched in positive ways? Jake seemed to consider this. I never thought about it that way. The aviation industry needs pilots like you, Sarah continued. Young, careful, methodical pilots who follow procedures and prioritize safety. Not every flight needs a risk taker. Most flights need exactly what you provide: steady, reliable, professional service. But when extraordinary situations arise, that's when experience matters. But those situations are rare, Jake. Most of the time, being a good pilot means being a safe pilot. You are a safe pilot. Jake was quiet for several minutes, processing what Sarah had said. Finally, he looked up at her. I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you several apologies. The things I've said about you, the way I've treated you, it was inexcusable. You were dealing with your own pain, Sarah said. I understand that now. No, there's no excuse for what I did. I tried to tear down your reputation because I couldn't live with my own failures. That's not just unprofessional, it's cowardly. Sarah studied Jake's face, seeing genuine remorse and the beginnings of self-forgiveness. Jake, what are you going to do now? I don't know. I've been thinking about leaving aviation altogether. Maybe I'm just not cut out for the responsibility. That would be a mistake, Sarah said firmly. The industry needs safety-conscious pilots. What happened 3 years ago was tragic, but it was also a learning experience. You're a better pilot now because of it. How can you be sure? Because you're here, talking to me about it. A pilot who doesn't care about passenger safety wouldn't lose sleep over a difficult decision. Your guilt tells me that you have exactly the kind of conscience the aviation industry needs. Jake managed a small smile. You're very kind, considering how I've treated you. We're all human, Jake. We all make mistakes, and we all deserve the chance to learn from them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the young barista who had been rude to Sarah the day before. He approached their table nervously, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. Captain Morrison, he said hesitantly. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I was completely out of line. This coffee is in the house, and I just wanted to say that what you did last night was incredible. Sarah accepted the coffee with a gracious smile. Thank you. And no apology is necessary. We all have bad days. After the barista left, Jake shook his head in amazement. Even after the way people have treated you, you're still gracious and forgiving. I don't know how. You do it. Experience, Sarah said with a wink. After 30 years in aviation, you learn that holding grudges is exhausting and counterproductive. There's too much work to be done to waste energy on anger. Jake laughed, the first genuine laugh Sarah had heard from him in months. You know, I think I'm beginning to understand why you were such a successful airline captain. And I think I'm beginning to understand why you've been so successful as a charter pilot. You care deeply about your passengers' safety. That's exactly the kind of pilot I'd want flying my family. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the tension that had existed between them for months finally beginning to dissipate. Sarah, Jake said finally, I heard rumors about job offers coming your way. The Coast Guard, some charter companies, maybe even a return to airline flying. What are you going to do? Sarah looked out the window at the airport, where aircraft were taking off and landing in the perfect afternoon weather. I'm going to keep flying, Jake. I'm going to use my experience to help train younger pilots, assist with difficult missions, and prove that age really is just a number in aviation. Good, Jake said firmly. The industry needs pilots like you. I just hope it's not too late to become one myself. It's never too late to become the pilot you want to be, Sarah replied. Trust me on that. 2 weeks after the rescue flight, Sarah found herself standing in the briefing room at Coast Guard Air Station Port Angeles, wearing a flight suit with Morrison emblazoned across the chest. Around the table sat 6 young Coast Guard pilots, all eager to learn from the woman who had become something of a legend in aviation circles. Today we're going to discuss advanced weather flying techniques, Sarah began, clicking to the first slide of her presentation. Not the textbook stuff you learned in flight school, but the real-world skills that will keep you alive when the weather turns ugly and people are depending on you. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, the station's operations officer, raised her hand. Captain Morrison, can you walk us through your decision-making process on the Bradley rescue flight? The weather reports showed conditions that most pilots would consider unflyable. Sarah smiled. That's exactly what we need to talk about. Weather reports tell you what the atmosphere is doing, but they don't tell you what an experienced pilot can handle. Let me show you the difference. She clicked a radar image of the storm system from that night. Who here would have attempted this flight based on this weather picture? None of the young pilots raised their hands. Good. That shows you have appropriate respect for dangerous weather. But now let me show you what I saw that night that made the flight possible. Sarah spent the next hour breaking down every aspect of the flight, how she'd read the storm patterns, identified flyable corridors through the weather, used the aircraft's capabilities to their maximum potential, and maintained situational awareness despite the challenging conditions. The key isn't being fearless, she explained. It's being knowledgeable enough to distinguish between acceptable risk and reckless endangerment. Experience teaches you where that line is. Lieutenant Josh Patterson, a pilot with 2 years of Coast Guard experience, looked skeptical. But Captain, don't you think there's value in being conservative? Better to be safe than sorry? Sarah nodded. Absolutely. Most of the time, conservative flying is exactly what's needed. But when you're in the search and rescue business, there will be times when someone's life depends on your ability to operate beyond normal limits. That's when experience becomes crucial. She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics on Coast Guard rescue operations. Look at these numbers. 60% of Coast Guard rescues occur in weather conditions that are marginal or worse. If we only flew in perfect weather, we'd save 60% fewer lives. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This is why the Coast Guard is changing its approach to experience and age, Sarah continued. We're realizing that pushing out experienced pilots just when they've developed the skills we need most is counterproductive. Commander Santos nodded. That's exactly right. The Coast Guard is implementing a new consultant program specifically to retain pilots like Captain Morrison. Experience like hers is too valuable to lose to arbitrary age limits. After the briefing, Sarah walked out to the flight line where a gleaming orange Coast Guard helicopter waited. This wasn't just a training exercise, they had a real mission. A fishing vessel had sent a distress call from 50 miles offshore, reporting engine failure and taking on water in heavy seas. Captain Morrison called Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, the same young man who had coordinated the Bradley rescue. "Are you ready for your first official Coast Guard mission?" Sarah grinned, feeling more energized than she had in years. "Chief, I've been ready for this my whole career." The helicopter lifted off into gray skies, with Sarah serving as mission commander while Lieutenant Patterson flew the aircraft. The seas below were rough, with 15-foot swells and whitecaps stretching to the horizon. "There," Sarah said, pointing to a small vessel barely visible among the waves. "That's our target." The fishing boat Mary Catherine was in serious trouble. Her engine compartment was flooded, and she was listing heavily to starboard. On deck, 3 fishermen waved frantically at the approaching helicopter. "How do you want to handle this, Captain?" Patterson asked. Sarah studied the situation carefully. The boat was too unstable for a normal rescue basket operation, and the seas were too rough for the helicopter to get close to the water. But she'd handled similar situations before. "We're going to use the rescue swimmer," she decided. "But we'll need to time the deployment perfectly with the wave action." "Chief Rodriguez, is your swimmer ready?" "Yes, ma'am." Petty Officer Williams is suited up and ready to go. Sarah watched the wave patterns carefully, timing the swells and identifying the best approach angle. "Lieutenant Patterson, bring us to a hover 50 feet above the boat." "Chief, deploy the swimmer on my mark." The helicopter moved into position, its rotor wash creating additional turbulence on the already rough seas. Sarah waited, watching the waves, feeling the rhythm of the ocean. "Mark!" The rescue swimmer dropped into the water with perfect timing, hitting the backside of a wave and swimming strongly toward the distressed vessel. Within minutes, he had reached the boat and was helping the first fisherman into a rescue basket. "Smooth operation," Patterson commented. "How did you know when to time the deployment?" "Experience," Sarah replied. "You learn to read the water the same way you read weather patterns. Everything has a rhythm if you know how to see it." One by one, the 3 fishermen were lifted to safety. As the helicopter turned toward shore, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful rescue mission. This was what she'd been missing during her forced retirement, the opportunity to use her skills in service of others. Back at the air station, the rescued fishermen were full of gratitude. The boat's captain, a grizzled veteran of 40 years at sea, shook Sarah's hand vigorously. "Ma'am, I don't know how old you are, but you fly like someone with a lot of experience." "That was beautiful work out there," Sarah smiled. "Thank you, Captain. Just doing our job." "Well, your job saved our lives today. Age is just a number when you know what you're doing." Later that evening, Sarah returned to her hotel room to find her phone buzzing with messages. The story of her Coast Guard mission had already made the news, part of a growing national conversation about age, discrimination in aviation, and other critical professions. One message stood out. It was from Jake. Morrison. "Sarah, saw the news about your Coast Guard mission. I wanted you to know that I've decided to stay in aviation. I've applied for a position with a medical transport company. Figured it's time to use my flying skills to help people instead of just making money. Thank you for showing me what real aviation leadership looks like." Sarah smiled and typed back, "Proud of you, Jake. The medical transport business needs pilots with your attention to safety and detail. You're going to save lives." Her phone rang almost immediately. It was Inspector Chun from the FAA. "Captain Morrison, I hope I'm not calling too late. I have some news about the pilot program we discussed." "I'm all ears," Sarah said. "The administrator has approved a pilot program, no pun intended, that will allow experienced pilots to continue flying beyond traditional retirement ages in specialized roles. Search and rescue, emergency medical transport, training operations, and other missions where experience is critical. Sarah felt her heart racing. What would be required? Enhanced medical examinations every 6 months, annual proficiency checks, and demonstrated competency in current aircraft systems. But for pilots with your background and recent performance record, it would essentially be a pathway back to full flying status. How many pilots would be eligible? Initially, we're looking at maybe 50 pilots nationwide. Captains with exceptional records, no accidents or incidents, and specialized skills that are in high demand. You'd be among the first to be certified. Sarah looked out her hotel window at the Coast Guard Air Station, where helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft sat ready for the next emergency call. When would this program start? If you're interested, we could have you certified within 30 days. The Coast Guard has already requested you specifically for their consultant program, and we've had inquiries from 3 major airlines about bringing you back as a training captain. For a moment, Sarah was speechless. After months of being told she was too old, too slow, too dangerous to fly, she was suddenly in demand from multiple organizations that needed her experience and expertise. Inspector Chun, I'm very interested. Where do I sign up? I'll send you the paperwork tomorrow. And Captain Morrison? Thank you for proving that experience matters. You've helped change the conversation about age and aviation in ways that will benefit the entire industry. After hanging up, Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the aircraft on the flight line. Tomorrow she would climb into one of those machines and use her skills to save lives, train younger pilots, and prove once again that age was just a number when it came to aviation excellence. Her phone buzzed with one more message. This one. From her daughter Lisa. Mom, I just saw the news coverage of your Coast Guard mission. I'm so proud of you for not giving up, for proving them all wrong. Dad would be so proud too. Love you. Sarah wiped away a tear and typed back. Love you too, sweetheart. And you're right, your father would be proud. He always said that the best pilots never stop learning and never stop flying. She looked out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The same stars that had guided aviators for generations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. New opportunities to prove that experience and skill didn't diminish with age. They only grew stronger. What did you think of this thrilling journey? Share your favorite moment in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest dailies. What kind of story would you like to hear next? The auditorium at the National Aviation Safety Foundation was packed with pilots, aviation executives, and safety officials from around the world. Sarah Morrison stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included many of the same people who had once dismissed her as too old to fly. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had guided aircraft through countless storms. 6 months ago, I was forced into retirement because someone decided that my age made me a safety risk. Today, I'm here to discuss the real risks facing aviation, and they have nothing to do with how old a pilot is. In the front row, Admiral Hayes nodded approvingly. Beside her sat Inspector Chun, Jake Morrison, and several of the young Coast Guard pilots. Sarah had been training. Even Marcus Webb was there, having become an unexpected ally in the fight against age discrimination in aviation. The Coast Guard Consultant Program has been a resounding success, Sarah continued. In 6 months, our experienced pilot consultants have participated in over 200 rescue operations, trained more than 150 younger pilots, and achieved a mission success rate that exceeds historical averages by 23%. The audience murmured with interest. These were impressive statistics in an industry where small improvements in safety and efficiency could save hundreds of lives. But the real story isn't about statistics, Sarah said, clicking to her next. Slide. It's about the recognition that experience, wisdom, and judgment don't expire on a pilot's 60th or 65th birthday. They continue to grow and develop, becoming more valuable with each passing year. She clicked to a photo of herself with the Coast Guard rescue team, all of them smiling after a successful mission. 3 weeks ago, we rescued a family of 4 from a sinking yacht in conditions that grounded most aircraft in the Pacific Northwest. The mission was successful not because we were reckless, but because we had the experience to operate safely in conditions that would have been prohibitive for less experienced crews. From the audience, a voice called out, "But what about the physical demands of flying? Don't reflexes slow down with age?" Sarah smiled. She'd been expecting this question. Reflexes do slow down with age, but modern aviation isn't about reflexes, it's about systems management, decision-making, and crew resource management. The most dangerous situations in aviation are resolved through knowledge and experience, not quick reflexes. She clicked to her next slide, showing accident statistics. Aircraft accidents are almost never caused by a pilot's reaction time being too slow. They're caused by poor decision-making, inadequate training, or failure to follow established procedures. Experience actually improves performance in all of these areas. In the audience, Jake Morrison raised his hand. "Captain Morrison, can you talk about the impact this program has had on pilot training?" Sarah smiled at Jake, who had become one of her strongest supporters. "The mentorship aspect of the program has been extraordinary. Pairing experienced pilots with younger crews has accelerated the learning curve for our new aviators while giving veterans like myself a renewed sense of purpose." She clicked a slide showing training statistics. Young pilots working with experienced mentors achieve proficiency benchmarks 40% faster than those in traditional training programs. They also show better decision-making skills and improved situational awareness. An airline executive in the middle of the auditorium stood up. "Captain Morrison, I'm Tom Bradley. You saved my life 6 months ago. I wanted to thank you publicly and ask about the possibility of expanding this program to commercial aviation." Sarah felt a warm glow of recognition. Tom Bradley had made a full recovery from his heart attack and had become an advocate for the experienced pilot program. "Mr. Bradley, several airlines are already implementing similar programs. The key is recognizing that not all flying jobs are the same. While there may be valid reasons for age limits on high-frequency, long-haul airline routes, there are many aviation roles where experience is more valuable than physical stamina." Admiral Hayes stood up from the front row. "I'd like to add that the Coast Guard has been so impressed with this program that we're expanding it to other specialties. Experienced maintenance chiefs, rescue swimmers, and operations specialists are all being retained beyond traditional retirement ages when their expertise is needed." The presentation continued for another hour, with Sarah fielding questions about medical standards, training requirements, and the future of age policies in aviation. Throughout it all, she felt a deep satisfaction, not just from being vindicated, but from knowing that her experience was making a real difference in the lives of both younger pilots and the people they served. After the presentation, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, ask questions, or share their own stories of age discrimination. But the conversation that meant the most came from a young woman who approached her as the crowd was dispersing. "Captain Morrison, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Inspector Chun's daughter. I'm a new Coast Guard pilot, and I just wanted to thank you." Sarah looked at the young woman with interest. "Thank me for what?" "For showing me what a career in aviation can look like. I was worried that I'd have to give up flying in my 60s, that all my experience would be wasted. Now I know that if I keep learning and growing, I can have a 40-year career helping people." Sarah felt tears forming in